People say the wind in Black Hollow never truly stops blowing, not because of the open terrain or the barren hills, but because restless spirits still wander the land. It is a place known for its harshness, soil hard as stone, too dry to dig a proper grave, and justice as rare as summer rain. On the far edge of the territory, where mesquite grows thick and the hills begin to rise, there stands a small ranch, almost forgotten by the world. That is where Clara Devin chose to live. Just an old two-room house, a leaning horse stable, and a rotting shed, nothing that would tempt the greedy. Yet it was precisely that isolation that made the place a perfect target for those who preyed on weakness. Clara arrived in Black Hollow 2 winters earlier, alone, with a mule carrying her belongings and a legally stamped land deed. No husband, no family, no explanation. The people of Red Brush watched her with suspicion. They guessed she was a widow, a woman running from something. But all they ever saw was a woman who worked in silence from dawn to dusk, building fences, patching the roof, coaxing crops from stubborn, lifeless soil. What they failed to notice was the way she moved, calm, deliberate, precise, like someone far too familiar with surviving in dangerous places. From the day she set foot in Black Hollow, Clara Devin never behaved like someone who needed protection. She arrived alone, no wagon train, no escort, no man at her side, just a mule carrying a few belongings and a legally stamped land deed. To the people of Red Brush, that spelled weakness. A lone woman on the edge of such a brutal territory rarely lasted more than a single winter. But Clara didn't disappear. Day after day, she worked without pause, driving fence posts into sun-baked ground, patching a roof riddled with holes, hauling bucket after bucket from a shallow well, tending a rocky stretch of land as if she truly believed it might one day bloom. She rode into town once a month, always on the same schedule, to buy flour, dried beans, and ammunition. Always ammunition. People assumed her silence came from loss. They called her a widow, though no one actually knew who her husband was or if he had ever existed at all. But Clara's quiet wasn't grief. It was vigilance. She walked without haste, every step measured. In the general store, she stood with her back to the wall, like someone long accustomed to never letting anyone approach from behind. And once, when a gun slipped and fell behind the counter, Clara caught it so fast it made more than a few people hold their breath. Clara Devin was not someone running from the past. She was someone who had survived long enough to never need to run again. The Calhoun gang rode into Red Brush on a dust-choked afternoon, carrying the smell of gunpowder and blood-soaked rumors. People whispered that they had just robbed a stagecoach 2 counties over, killing a Pinkerton agent during their escape. When they entered town, the sheriff was nowhere to be found, and no one else had the courage to stand in their way. They drank the saloon dry, smashed the windows of the general store, and laughed loudly as if the land already belonged to them. Then one of them made a crude joke about the widow living alone out in Black Hollow, a small, isolated ranch with no one to protect it. To them, it sounded like an easy prize. Virgil Calhoun, the leader, rolled a knife between his fingers and remarked how unfortunate it would be if something bad were to happen to that place. His men burst out laughing. They weren't drawn by wealth, they were drawn by the thrill of dominance. And they believed Clara Devin was the very image of weakness. Only one person in town muttered 2 words under their breath: idiots. The sun bled red across the horizon as 4 riders left Red Brush, heading toward Black Hollow. They rode like wolves, convinced their prey had been cornered in the dark. They had no idea they were knocking on the gates of hell. When the 4 riders of the Calhoun gang reached the Devin ranch, the sun was sinking low, staining the sky a blood-orange red. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, and lantern lights spilled warm and golden through the windows. Everything looked so peaceful that it made them smile with smug confidence. Clara stood on the porch, her apron still tied at her waist, lamplight softening her silhouette. She didn't hide, she didn't step back. When Virgil Calhoun climbed onto the wooden steps with a false smile and a mocking tone, Clara answered him only with a calm as cold as river stone. One of the younger men grew bold, his hand drifting toward his gun, a sneer on his face. That was his first mistake. The shot rang out so fast no one realized when Clara had drawn her weapon. The bullet tore through his thigh, dropping him into the dirt. before the others could even react, another shot came from the darkness near the barn, shattering the lantern and throwing the entire yard into chaos. Clara stepped off the porch, her coat falling open just enough to reveal two pearl-handled pistols at her sides. She moved with precision, with purpose. Two shots knocked the gun from Virgil's hand. Another dropped the man behind him in the space of a single breath. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were on their knees, and one stood with his hands raised. "You came looking for a sheep," Clara said quietly, "but you found a wolf." At dawn the next morning, the 4 riders left Black Hollow no longer as arrogant wolves, but as men with their pride broken. 3 were badly wounded, one nearly unconscious, his leg wrapped in linen taken from Clara Devin's own supplies. They limped back toward town under the stunned stares of the people of Red Brush. No one asked questions. No one dared to laugh. But inside the saloon, the story spread faster than whiskey. People said Clara drew her guns as calmly as if it were a Sunday stroll, that she shot one man through the thigh without killing him just to send a message, that she disarmed the leader with 2 precise shots, as if every movement had been calculated long before the first trigger was pulled. No rage, no panic, only cold, measured justice. From that day on, the name Clara Devin was no longer spoken with pity. People began calling her by other names: the Iron Widow, the Ghost of Black Hollow. A legend was born not from rumor, but from the very real fear in the eyes of those who had faced her and survived. But reputation always has 2 sides. It doesn't just bring respect, it draws the attention of those who want to test a legend. And that was only the beginning. If you want to know what happens when even more dangerous men come to Black Hollow, keep following the story. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the smoke-filled, justice-driven legends of the Wild West. Clara Devin's reputation traveled farther than she ever wanted it to. And then, on a dust-heavy afternoon with the wind cutting low across the land, someone came looking for her. Not a bandit, but her own past. Isaac Marrow emerged from the edge of the cottonwood trees, his gray coat coated with the dust of a long road, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. He had once been a Pinkerton, had survived gunfights in places where Clara's name had been erased from every ledger back east. He was one of the very few who knew who she really was. "The rumors are spreading," Isaac said quietly, "and it's not just fools like the Calhoun gang who are hearing them." He pulled a worn, yellowed sheet of paper from his coat. On it was Clara's face, younger but unmistakable. The reward of $10,000 in gold was still clearly printed. Not for what she had just done, but for what she used to be. Isaac warned her that more dangerous, more ambitious men were taking notice. Some wanted to kill her to make a name for themselves. Others wanted to use her as a weapon. Clara looked at the wanted poster in her hands, then folded it slowly. "I'm not that person anymore," she said. Isaac answered softly, "Maybe, but the world hasn't forgotten. And in the West, the past never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to come back, bringing more guns with it." 3 days after Isaac's warning, the eastern horizon rolled up under a thick wall of dust. It wasn't the usual wind of Black Hollow, but a storm raised by 30 riders, an army in its own right. At their head rode Luther Knox, a former Confederate captain turned infamous mercenary. He didn't shout, he didn't boast. He gave orders and men obeyed because they were afraid. Knox believed legends were things meant to be crushed in the open sun. Clara didn't wait for them to reach her door. From the roof of the barn, she tracked every movement, every distance. Isaac took position behind the hay wagon, his rifle ready. "Too many," he whispered. Clara answered simply, "Then we don't let them stand together." The first shot rang out as the sun crested the horizon, clean, precise. One man pitched from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, men shouted, bullets tore through the air. Clara moved like a shadow through smoke and dust, appearing and vanishing before the echo of the second shot could fade. By sundown, 10 men lay motionless. 5 had fled, and the rest were badly wounded. Knox stood alone in the yard, his gun trembling in his hand. "You're just a woman," he snarled. Clara stepped out of the smoke, her Colt lowered but unwavering. "I'm the widow of the man you killed." 2 shots rang out. Only one stayed in the air, and the storm of steel ended right there, at Devin's Ridge. The death of Luther Knox spread like fire in a strong wind. But this time, The riders who came to Devin's Ridge didn't arrive with guns drawn, they arrived with a federal seal. A week after the battle, a white canvas wagon stopped in front of the ranch. Stepping down from it was Marshal Jedediah Klein, dust-free suit, a courteous smile, and the eyes of a man used to controlling the board. He hadn't come to arrest Clara. He had come to make an offer. "You've been doing the work the law can't reach," Klein said, holding out a badge that gleamed with a cold shine. "We need people who can clean up the places the law has forgotten." The meaning was clear. Legitimize what Clara was already doing. Give her authority, power, and protection so long as she fought under their name. Isaac objected at once. "She's not your weapon." But Clara didn't answer right away. She studied the badge in Klein's hand, small, bright, and heavier than it looked. A badge could be a tool of justice, or it could just as easily become a new set of chains. "If I accept," she asked, "who decides who I point my gun at?" Klein smiled vaguely. "We do." That night, Clara sat on the porch, watching the moon climb high. Saying yes would mean stepping into a system that had abandoned places like Black Hollow in the first place. But this time, perhaps she could change the rules. From the inside, the first winter settled over Devin's Ridge, with a thin skin of frost, when Marshal Klein returned. This time, he didn't come alone. 2 agents in regulation coats rode with him, their expressions hard, their hands never far from their gun grips. There was no longer any gentle offer. Klein dismounted, his face stripped of courtesy. "You killed a federal contractor," he said. "Luther Knox was working for my office." "Of course." Clara stood in the yard, her breath turning white in the cold air, her hand never leaving her holster. "He brought 30 gunmen to kill me," she replied evenly. "If that was your contract, you should hire better men." The air tightened like a drawn wire. The 2 agents stepped forward, but Klein raised a hand to stop them. He studied Clara for a long moment, weighing law against reality. Finally, he tossed a small object onto the frozen ground at her feet. A silver badge. Not the polished emblem of a federal office, but a territorial marshal's badge, legal official. "You have enemies," Klein said slowly. "But you also have a reputation. People are listening now, and they're afraid." Clara bent down and picked up the badge, the silver catching the pale winter light. She understood this much clearly. This wasn't forgiveness. It was recognition. The law hadn't caught her. It chose to stand beside her. Clara didn't pin on the badge right away. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the cold weight of the silver as if weighing an oath. When she finally fastened it to her coat, just above the old scar, where a bullet had once nearly taken her life, it wasn't an act of surrender to authority. It was the moment she redefined it. "I accept," she told Klein, "but this badge doesn't protect the corrupt. It doesn't turn its back on ordinary people. If I wear it, I decide what it stands for. Sayos." From that day on, the name Clara Devin was no longer tied only to Black Hollow. People began calling her by new names: the Widow Marshal, the Silver Ghost, the woman who carried the law into places the law had long abandoned. She rode from town to town, not chasing fame but restoring order. Sometimes words were enough to end a fight. Sometimes steel and gunpowder were the only answer. Either way, she acted by the same rule every time. No one had the right to turn weakness into an excuse for cruelty. And if anyone ever drew a gun hoping to claim her legend by ending her life, they quickly learned why people called her the fastest shot in the West. Clara was once a widow. Now, she was justice.